I'm 94 years old. My name is Eileen Alt Lacey. I was born in August the 18th, 19 and 22. And I'm from Arkansas, Garland County. And the place where I was born and spent the early part of my life is under Lake Ouachita. The dam covered up the place where I lived. It was very different out in the country. There was one school. It went from the first grade through the 8th grade. And we walked to school. We didn't have buses like they do now. And I walked about a quarter of a mile to school, which was not very far. And there wasn't any traffic because people didn't have cars when I first was going to that school. And I'd go home for lunch. We had plenty of time. And my mother and dad had a general store. It wasn't just groceries. They had fabric and all kinds of other things that wouldn't just be groceries. And I'd go home and eat my lunch. My mother worked in the store, and they had a glass enclosed counter that had candy in it. And I ate enough candy for a half a dozen people. I always got a candy bar, Babe Ruth, Milky Way, or something after I ate and went back to school and walked back to school. I got a bicycle. I think I was the only one out there that had a bicycle. We had a family that lived close to us that had 2 boys and a girl, and they used to throw rocks at me. I think they were jealous because they didn't have a bicycle. But anyway, I fell many a time and skinned up my knees. They were just bloody and blue off and on all the time because it was rough. There was no pavement. It was just dirt road. But after I finished the 8th grade out there, they wanted me to continue school, and they were still living there. And this is about 25 miles from Hot Springs. And I came to Hot Springs and finished school. And one thing I remember that was very interesting and nerve-wracking for me at that age. A teacher out in the country had taught me algebra, and I knew algebra upside down. And when I came to Hot Springs, 9th grade was the first year they had algebra. And he had me go up to the blackboard, my teacher, and solve the algebra problems on the blackboard. And I was real timid, and it embarrassed me. And I could just solve them like it's nothing, and the other kids would sit there with their mouth open. How does she do that? That's the one thing that I did that I really can remember, because it was so embarrassing to get up in front of the class and work those problems. There was a little community from where I lived, another little community that was all white, and it's about 3 miles apart. And about the middle between the 3 miles was a settlement of black people. And they did regular work both places for people at that time. But they were not in school, and I cannot remember if they had their own school or not, but they did not come to our school. The first school that I can remember being segregated was I was working in the Hot Springs High School office. I think I was in my late 30s, and the principal paced the floor every morning before school started, afraid that the black people were going to come and want to go to school. And they weren't we didn't have colored people. But they never did come while he was principal. But it was during that time that they allowed them to start coming to school with us. And we never had any problem with them at all. And I can't remember how many came or what kind of condition it was, but We never had any problem with them, and I think they have probably more problem now than they did then. I did a lot of hunting and fishing with my dad. I remember one time when we were out on the creek fishing and hunting. He had always had his gun with him. He had killed a quail, and it fell in the creek, and it started down the creek with the current, and he told me to go down the creek bank and watch it till he could, something he needed to do, and then he'd come and get it out of the creek. Well, my mother liked to had a fit when I got home, because she said, what if she'd have slid in the creek and there's nobody there to get her out? She would have drowned, because I couldn't swim. Those are exciting times that I can remember when I was a child. I met James at the church that was about like 2 blocks from where we lived. And we started dating, and I guess it was close to 2 years, a year and a half maybe, that we dated, and then we got married. There was no jobs to speak of, and no money at that time. You could get an ice cream cone for a nickel and a Coke for a nickel, and everything was real cheap, but it didn't matter because you didn't have any money anyway. And I remember when Papa and I maybe had been married a couple of years, and he worked for a service station up on Park Avenue and made $14 a week. That's how bad the economy was at that time. We lived with my parents until Bob was 1 year old. We would never made it on our own because there just wasn't any money. I remember after, when we got married, the night that we got married, James's sister, a little older than he was, married this preacher, and he married us. And James gave him $8, and that was all the money he had. I don't know how we got in the movie, but we went to Hot Springs after we got married to the movie. And I can't remember how many days he had to work before he had any more money. Well, when Bob was born, when he was a year old and we moved down out to ourselves, there was 2 different couples that lived with us 6 weeks each at different times, that needed a place to live for a short time. And I cooked for them, and they stayed with us, and I remember they gave me $20 a week, and that sounded like no money now, but it was really helpful. It would buy the groceries then. And during that time, we didn't have a car. But I had a cousin who worked for the Buick Company, and he was kind of up the ladder, so to speak, for Buick, and he got us a brand new Buick for wholesale, and I remember it cost $1,800. And we rode the train to St. Louis and picked the car up. We were thrilled to death. He had 4 different service stations in Hot Springs. At one time, he had 2 at the same time. One was on Park Avenue, and one was on Albert Pike. And I had been working for the school system, and one day when he had the service station at the corner of Central and Grand, he went out to service a car, and he had a money bag with $200 in it, and somebody stole it. Like I said, I was working for the school system, bookkeeper for the Hot Springs school system. And he said, I need you to come and help me. Your time is more valuable with me than it is where you're working. And from then on, I worked with Papa and took care of the bills and the deposits and that sort of thing, and he didn't have to do that. At that time, service stations did car washing, lubricating, which I understand now most cars don't have to be lubricated. And he always had a good business. People followed him. But the bad thing was, and this doesn't sound very good, but he would take a job with a company like Exxon or Mobil, and maybe he'd have the service station a couple of months and he'd build up a good business, and they'd go up on his rent and they'd tell him he had to work on Sunday when they told him to begin with he wouldn't have to open on Sunday. They changed it all. Of course, we didn't have it in writing. And therefore, that's why he'd sell a station and get out and then go get him another one, because they kept making it hard to make a living by doing that sort of thing. And finally, he had, I guess you'd call it, so much strain and nerves that one of the doctors here in Hot Springs suggested that he just sell everything and move and see if he couldn't find something that would be so nerve-wracking on him. And we moved to Albuquerque, New Mexico, and stayed 6 months. And he helped dealers out there, people who were going to be service station dealers, because they were just moving into New Mexico and they were building stations. And when he got them trained after so many weeks, they wanted him to take one of the stations in Albuquerque, and we were pretty homesick. And he'd gotten some better with his stomach condition from the doctor said nerves, that we came back to Hot Springs. And he went to work for a man at a service station. But he took off from work and built our house, helped build our house. And when he got the house built, this man asked him if he would buy his service station. He said, I don't have any money. I've spent all my money building a house. He said, if you'll take the service station, you can pay me whenever you want to. This man was a retired government man and had a good income, and he realized he did not know how to operate a station. He would tell customers when they'd drive up, you're not parked right, you've got to move. And he run everybody off because he tried to use military tactics on them, and they don't work. When Papa was diagnosed with dementia, it gradually got worse. And I took care of him as good as I could, but physically I wasn't really able. And it got worse to the point that he couldn't understand what I'd want him to do. He'd forget before I'd tell him. Hardly got it out of my mouth. He couldn't even remember which way to go to the bathroom. And I had to help him. I had to take care of him. Sometimes we had to change clothes as much as 3 times in one day. So when he passed, it was not near as hard as it would have been if he had just dropped dead, because he had no life left. And we had no life together because he couldn't remember anything. So the 3 people that have been the closest to me that have passed, God has made it easy. I do miss him a lot, and I don't know how long it'll take to get over it, but I didn't want him here like he was, and I knew he couldn't come back, so it has helped.